Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching and let's get right into this. So on July 23rd of this year, 2021, I separated my right AC joint playing ice hockey. I play 2 to 3 times a week recreationally, and it was just one of those things that in a fast sport like that you can't control, and unfortunately injuries happen. I was skating across the ice with a defender to my left, and I didn't see the goalie coming out to play the puck at the same time because of that defender on my left, and the goalie slid out and took my legs out from underneath me, and I went over top and landed right on my shoulder. It was pretty painful from the get-go, but it was just that initial thud of the pain. And then the most uncomfortable part after that, honestly, was just my adrenaline being so high that I felt like I needed to take a nap or throw up. But got in the locker room, felt it, was like, oh crap, I broke my collarbone. That doesn't feel normal. So threw some ice on it to kind of help deal with the pain in the moment. I didn't ice it after that, which we'll get into, but went to the hospital, got the x-rays done, and they determined it was between a grade 2 and 3 separation, and they determined that just based on the space between the bones. So you might even be able to see through my shirt, I have the collarbone sticking up. It'll be that way for life, and just the space between that determines the grade of it. Now between a 2 and a 3, they were unsure if I needed surgery at that point. So essentially all they did was give me a sling and say, good luck, come back in a couple weeks and we'll make a determination after that. At that point, I didn't really have pain unless I cranked it into a range of motion that it was unable to be into. So I was pretty optimistic that I would be able to make a full recovery. And all I did to start, this was the first week, was I did the most pain-free, smallest cars controlled articular rotations that I could. Going into those in depth is for another video, but essentially at that time, it just looked like this. Not very big, but I was moving the joint the same day in pain-free movement. And that's gonna be the number one takeaway if you take anything from this video, is moving pain-free and letting pain guide you when it's time to move on into bigger ranges of motion and things like that, because it's very easy to add strength to things. It is much harder to build back range of motion that your body doesn't have access to. So my main goal, I knew I was going to be able to build back strength, but in the next 4 to 6 weeks was to get it as mobile and pain-free as I could. The only time I didn't move it was when I was sleeping, and I had to sleep sitting up for that first week, and I kept it sitting in the most anatomically neutral or normal position as I could. So if those muscles did tighten up overnight, that it would be in a pretty normal neutral position versus having it forward or something like that and having it tighten in a position that I would have to try to loosen it out of, for instance. And then I said I didn't ice it after the initial impact of the shoulder, and the reason for that is inflammation is the first step in the healing process, and I didn't want to dull that. So even though it was going to swell a little bit, I knew that that was a sign that it was already starting to heal, and I didn't want to throw ice on that and try to diminish that. So once I was able to move a little bit more pain-free in my shoulder in the scapula after the first week, I started the rehab process. And typically for a joint injury like this, there's 5 steps to take, and that's what we'll go over now, and you'll actually see some videos pop up of me doing these steps. And the reason why these steps are pretty key is it'll help you move through at a good pace, because you don't want to rush these things and then have your joint get upset, or you're, like I said previously, you're adding strength on top of the dysfunction of the joint, because you want the joint to function properly first. It's very easy to add strength. It's harder to get joints to move the way that they should. So the first step of the 5 was isometric holds. And all isometric holds are contracting muscles without moving. So there's 3 movements that typically get limited in this kind of injury, and that's going to be shoulder flexion like this, shoulder adduction, which is coming across the body like this. Think of flies, push-ups, any sort of pressing exercise. And then lastly, shoulder extension. Think of dips or anything behind the body there, even some form of rows. So knowing that, I wanted to make sure that those were the 3 movements in mind that I wanted to build back. And like I said, at this point, my range of motion wasn't very big, but it was pain-free. So I knew it was time to start the process. So back to step 1, isometric holds. I did ring rows and ring push-ups as my exercise, mainly because I would be able to pull my shoulder blades down and back while keeping the shoulder in a pretty neutral position, but I would start to build the musculature back in those areas while staying pain-free. So for instance, on the ring rows, isometrically, I would hold in the bottom here for about 20 seconds. And all I'm trying to do is stay pain-free and making sure the tension is where it should be. So for instance, in this, the tension should be in my upper back, pulling my shoulder blades down and back. I shouldn't be feeling anything in the front here. And then the same thing when I was in the shortened position. So I would hold this position as well. So I would hold, making sure my shoulder blades are down and back. I'm dumping forward into the shoulder. I did the same thing for ring push-ups. So holding the top of a plank, really focusing on my pec engagement, making sure that I didn't feel anything within this shoulder. And then in the bottom position as well, making sure that if I was getting into that extension, even if it wasn't my full extension, it was pain-free and I wasn't dumping forward. So essentially you're trying to maintain contractions of the right kind of muscles or radiating in the right spots within certain ranges of motion. So isometric holds, no matter that kind of injury, making sure that the muscles are firing up and holding the joints in the right spot. I did that for about a week, and then I started to get more and more range of motion. Throughout all of this, I was doing my cars every day as much as I could to kind of use that as a gauge to where my motion was. And then based on where my motion was is where I would determine when I can start adding strength back to that motion. So after the isometric holds, the next stage is eccentric movements, and that's just lengthening muscles under tension. So for instance, on a bicep curl, this is the eccentric movement. You're lengthening the bicep while you're keeping tension in it. So back to those ring rows and ring push-ups, for instance, I would start the row in the fully contracted position, and I would slowly lower myself to the starting position, making sure I'm keeping tension in those muscles in the right spots. And for the push-ups, it would be the opposite. So I would have the rings here, and I would slowly lower myself into the bottom of the push-up, feeling the pecs and the shoulders lengthen while keeping tension in them. And then for instance, on that push-up, once I hit the bottom position, I would let go, reset, and go back into that rep, not doing the concentric phase just yet. And the reason why this is key to do before concentric movements is you want to make sure that those muscles are getting tension, but they're lengthening. You don't want to constantly be shorting your muscles and then get stuck in a shortened position, for instance, like if I just did my pecs and my shoulders would start to get stuck here. You want to lengthen those muscles under tension so, again, you can get back to that pain-free full range of motion. The eccentrics lasted like half a week, and then I was like, all right, this feels awesome. I can definitely feel like I'm getting that endorphin rush from exercise again. Sorry, Ashlyn, my cat is very vocal about this as well. So after I did the eccentrics, then it was time to do the concentrics. And this is what most people think of. So like going back to that bicep curl, this is concentrically flexing my bicep, so I'm shortening the muscle. So then for the opposite of this, for the ring rows, for example, if I was concentrically moving, I would pull myself up, shorten, and then let go from this position. Now I'd walk my feet back so I didn't just drop. And then for the push-ups, for instance, bottom position, push myself up, reset at the bottom. And the reason why you don't want to throw both in together yet is there's just too much going on at this point to throw that much into it. You want to make sure you can eccentric control the movement and then concentrically control it as well before we throw it all together. And at this point as well, I was already starting to hang from a pull-up bar. I was starting to put a PVC pipe over my head, just trying to get comfortable with lengthening the lats and pulling my ribs down, all of that good stuff. So isometric holds, eccentric movement, concentric movement, and then it's dynamic movements. And essentially that's just moving how you would in normal training. It's multi-joints, it's concentric and eccentric movements thrown together. So just your normal training, but again, you're staying pain-free in what range of motion you have. So if I couldn't push overhead fully at this point, but I could push to here, then movements like a landmine press are great because you're working within that range of motion. You're working the eccentric and concentric part of that movement, but you're not forcing yourself into a range of motion you don't have accessible to you yet. So there's one step left. We have isometric holds, eccentric movement, concentric movement, dynamic movement, and then sport specific. And this is what you want to do with this. So for instance, going back to hockey, Connor McDavid hurt his knee. For his sport specific, he needed to have his knee back to being able to be the best ice hockey player on the planet. For you, that could be just being able to grab your kid and put them overhead or anything like that. So you get to determine what your normal is, and this is why training is such a good indicator for where we need work, and it's a great way to kind of view it that way as like a body maintenance, because you get to kind of gradually work towards what you want. So again, to kind of recap, we did isometric holds, keeping tension in muscles without moving. 2, eccentric movements, keeping tension in the muscles while they're lengthening. 3, concentric movements, shortening the muscles with the right tension. 4, dynamic movements, that's just multi-joint, concentric and eccentric thrown together. And then finally, sport specific. So for me, this was being able to, I wanted to do pull-ups. So being able to do pull-ups, hang from a pull-up bar. I wanted to go play hockey again. So at this stage, I started rehabbing hockey stuff, and then I was back out on the ice. This only took about 6 weeks to get back to normal training, and 8 weeks before I barely even noticed my shoulder until like I got a weird look and forgot. I was like, oh yeah, my collarbone's popping up for life now. So there is hope for you if this injury has happened to you. And even if you've kind of worked to strengthen before you've built the range of motion back, your body wants to build that range of motion back. So just kind of altering your training to do that will help you. I hope this video has helped you kind of see if you've had this injury, where you can go, or if you've had any other form of injuries, kind of the steps to take to get there, because this is true for almost every single kind of joint injury. Once you start dealing with tendons and ligaments and things like that, it changes slightly, but for mainly like joints and muscular kind of injuries, these 5 steps will definitely help you progress faster. And remember, pain-free range of motion first, and then add that strength. Thank you guys for supporting me in all the ways that you do, even if that is just hitting like and subscribe. That helps with algorithm relevancy. Make sure you guys also click the links down below, or send me a message if you have any questions in the comments or on Instagram. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.